Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. I'm very excited to be interviewing Dr. Edison De Mello today, who's our special guest. Dr. De Mello is a licensed psychotherapist and a board-certified integrative physician. Dr. De Mello is the founder and medical director of the Akasha Center in Santa Monica. Dr. De Mello's PhD dissertation was entitled Gut Feelings, a Psychosocial Approach to Gastrointestinal Health, and he's committed to integrating the mind and a person's emotional and spiritual health into his approach to treating patients with digestive disorders. Dr. De Mello has recently published his first book, Bloated: How to Reclaim Your Gut Health and Eat Without Pain. And we certainly need to know about that. Dr. De Mello, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here, Ben, and thank you everybody out there for listening to us this morning.
Absolutely. So, Dr. De Mello, why do people have so many gut problems these days, including stomach pain, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, etc.?
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question, right? I know we are dealing with a horrific epidemic right now, and I don't mean to diminish the certainly all the suffering and all the death and all the desperation of this epidemic, because I'm one of the physicians out there in the front lines. But there's another epidemic happening.
The epidemic within the epidemic, as I've heard Dr. Bland say recently.
Exactly. As we know, health starts in the gut. And we've heard this throughout our lives in medicine. That the gut is the carburetor of our health, basically. Without the gut, we wouldn't be able to function. We wouldn't be able to correctly metabolize our hormones. And so because of lifestyle and because of the toxicity of the environment, because of stress, and because most of us have not really sat down and asked ourselves, what is my relationship with food? How does my body receive this nutrient that it needs, that is heavily necessary for our well-being? But if it's not done correctly, it can work against the very thing that we want to do, which is to be healthy. And so why do we have this epidemic? Again, I can go through a list of things we see you, Ben, today, but I will start by saying we need to step back and ask ourselves, is what I'm doing in my life, is what I'm doing with my eating working? Am I processing my food correctly? Am I eliminating correctly? Am I able to dedicate time to really allow my body to digest this food? And so that's where I start with my patients. You know, when they come in, and certainly the complaint that I hear most often, because of my double degree and the double focus that I applied in my practice, the complaint is I don't feel well. I don't feel comfortable. I'm embarrassed. I look like, if it's a woman, I look like I'm pregnant. If it's a man, I have a beer belly, even though I don't drink that much. And so the question is, what is your body telling you? What is the message that the body has to tell you that there's something is off? So the first thing is look at our lifestyles, look at how we relate to the very nutrient that we need. The second thing is the ability to listen to the message that the body has for us. We are all about communication, and the body is no different. The language of communication in the body to relate to us is called symptoms. And our job as the host of this body is to stop and listen and say, I keep hearing the same message. I eat and I don't feel well. I eat and I cannot eliminate, or I feel bloated, or I feel I don't feel healthy. What's going on? When you pose that question, I think you have walked halfway into a possible answer.
It's amazing that we get all these signals, and yet most people are totally oblivious to those signals, partially because of all the noise and all the things going on, and the messaging about eating unhealthy foods that just happen to be profitable. But what I have found is a lot of people are not at all attuned to those messages.
No, I think first of all, I think when we have symptoms or disease, we usually think of it as the enemy and we want to fight it off. And when we do that, we spend so much energy on the symptoms, trying to fight it off, rather than stopping and saying, what is the message? And actually, as obvious as it may sound, ask ourselves, okay, so this body, like I said before, is trying to tell me something. Let me take notice of it. So the first thing that I do, Ben, when a patient comes in is try to figure out who this person is. Who is this person who happens to have a condition? Because when we connect with the person and we find out what his or her views of disease are, what the lifestyle is, what the relationship is with food, why now, why bloating now, right? When we stop and meet the patient before we meet their diseases, again, I think there's a great deal of information that we can get from those patients. And as you know, being in that space of functional medicine yourself, that's the cornerstone of integrative medicine, of functional medicine, is to meet the patient, is to let the patient be part of this incredible journey that we're doing in discovering the message that the body's trying to tell us.
So your book's about bloating. And what do we mean by bloating? What is bloating? How is this different from gas? What's the significance of bloating?
Okay, excellent question, right? In the book, I try to explain the difference between bloating and swelling, right?
And bloating and fat, and bloating and a lot of things, right?
Exactly, and bloating and fat, as you said. Bloating is a condition where it's gas, basically. It's a lot of gas in your body, and there's no rhyme or reason when it's going to happen. Sometimes you eat, and soon after you eat, your belly extends where you feel like you have a watermelon sitting there. Other times it takes a couple of hours. It can even take a day, which is a delayed hypersensitivity reaction to whatever you're eating. So bloating is completely separate from fat. You know, fat takes a little while for you to build in your body when we don't eat healthy, when our hormones are not metabolized. It progressively increases and it gets worse and worse. So with bloating, you have it one day, the next day, you find a way to diminish, the next day, the day after that, it gets worse. It's this kind of ongoing battle where there are days that you can close your jeans, there are days that you can't. And you ask yourself, I didn't do anything differently. And here's a question that I hear the most, Ben. But Dr. De Mello, I hardly ate anything yesterday. Why am I bloated today? Right? And I say, well, let's have a little talk with your gastrointestinal bacteria. Let's talk to your microbiome and see what's happening there.
So once we've ruled out some of the most severe pathological conditions, which we don't see too often, like fluid from liver or kidney disease or congestive heart failure, what are some of the most common reasons for bloating?
Yeah, so thank you for qualifying that. You know, for our great listeners out there, we have to, before we move into the bloating wagon, we need to rule out any potential medical reasons, physiological reasons for that. And as you said, you know, it could be anything from a liver condition, you know, where you're retaining water. It can be your kidney as well. It can be congestive heart failure. It can be a multitude of things that we healthcare professionals will focus on eliminating, starting with perhaps a simple imaging exam or imaging test, such as an ultrasound, and also looking, of course, at labs. Once that is ruled out, the most common reason for people to have this bloating disorder, bloating condition, is a dysbiotic gut, meaning your gut is out of balance, right? Here's the interesting thing about bacteria that we all know. Bacteria is incredible, helpful to our lives, from making our incredible wine, to making cheese, to helping with our gardening, to helping even clean our environment. Bacteria can be incredibly helpful to a very, very good lifestyle. But as I wrote in a paper once called Bacteria, Friend or Foe, bacteria can also kill you, right? When you go into the hospital, we can have several reasons or several possibilities why bacteria has overgrown, from a simple cut that was not well taken care of, to a surgical condition that became a problem, to a multitude of other things that could lead to bacteria overgrowth. So the question is, how do I look at this bacteria overgrowth? How do I balance my microbiome? The first question again is, what am I eating? And is there a connection between what I'm eating and this bloating that happens? Not only what am I eating, but what have I been fed as well? For instance, we often say we are what we eat. And I add a little bit more, I say, and what we've been fed, right? Because as kids, we don't have a choice. And sometimes as patients, we don't have a choice. We're fed antibiotics. And for good reasons, a lot of the time, to save our lives. But when we fed the bad foods, the bad antibiotics, the multitude of medical intervention meant to help us stay alive, in most cases, it does the job of helping us stay alive, but it also diminishes the overall function of our immune system. Because as I said, health starts in your gut. Your gut is the seat of your immune system. And so the idea is to say, okay, if I need to take this antibiotic or if I need to take this medication, how can I help my body break it down? One of the most important things out there is probiotics, right? How many times do we hear in traditional medicine when a patient comes in to say, my doctor put me on antibiotics for sinusitis or for pneumonia, and we say, oh, did she or he tell you to eat a bit differently when you're on antibiotic? Did he tell you to take probiotics, to exercise, to sweat this thing out of your body? How about drink water? And so the idea is to really be able to support the body, to be able to process those things out of your body, out of the body, including some foods, including antibiotics, including even our vitamin and supplements. The idea is to allow the body to digest it better. And how do you do that? You do that by, first of all, stopping to ask yourself, right? Can I dedicate a specific amount of time to my eating, or am I eating on the go? Then secondly, you say to yourself, I've noticed that when I eat these foods, I don't feel good. Can I do a process of elimination and do elimination diet? And third, you can say, I wonder if my hormones have been checked. So let me talk to my practitioner about that, right? Because if your hormones are off, so is your metabolism. And so you can go through a list of things that can help you get to this idea of, why am I bloated?
I've really been enjoying this discussion, but I'd like to take a minute to tell you about a new product that I'm very excited about. I'd like to tell you about a new wearable called the Apollo. And this is a device that can be worn on the wrist or the ankle, and it uses vibrations to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. And this device has amazing benefits in terms of getting you out of that stressed out sympathetic nervous system and stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. It has a number of different functions, especially helping you to relax, to focus, to concentrate, to get into a deeper meditative state, even to help you sleep. And there's even a mode to help you wake up. And this all occurs through the scientific use of subtle vibrations. For those of you who might be interested in getting the Apollo for yourself to help you reset your nervous system, go to apolloneuro.com and use the affiliate code Weitz10. That's my last name, WEITZ 10. And now back to the discussion. So let's say, and this question, let's answer it both from the perspective of an educated patient as well as a practitioner. A patient has bloating. How do we go about the process of figuring out what some of the causes are? You mentioned dysbiosis, and of course, dysbiosis is somewhat of a diagnosis, but it's kind of a general one. It means that there's some imbalance in the gut bacteria, and within that general sort of larger diagnosis, we have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, we have overgrowth of candida and fungus, we have other bacteria that could be overgrown like strep or prevotella, we have parasites, we have food sensitivities, we have H. pylori. How do we now drill down? What sort of tests and procedures do we want to do to figure out exactly what is the cause of bloating in this patient?
Yeah. So again, excellent question. I start with the big ones, right? So I want to do a breath test for H. pylori.
Okay.
There's a great deal of patients out there who have H. pylori and they don't even know it. They have GERD or acid reflux. They have bloated. They don't feel good. They feel the energy is much decreased than what it used to be. So I do the breath test for H. pylori. Depending on the history, if the history is also the history where bloating just suddenly comes, then I will also do a SIBO test. The SIBO test, as you mentioned, is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. The SIBO test, it's a breath test, and then we usually do it in the office, so we teach our patients how to do it at home. And depending, of course, on the patient's financial ability and insurance protocol, I will also order a stool test. I personally love the Genova's 3-day stool test.
Okay.
That is because I'm looking for not only an assessment of your microbiome, the patient's microbiome, but I'm also looking for other microorganisms growth that is in there. I'm looking for digestive enzymes. I'm looking for the metabolites coming out of the patient. And the 3 days really yields a lot of more information. So those are the three big ones.
So this is the Genova GIFX stool test, the 3-day one. Which SIBO breath test do you do?
I work with Sam Rabar, who's a gastroenterologist.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. He's been on the podcast a number of times. Yeah.
So I use his test that he.
Okay.
And the reason I do that is because I can call Sam when I get the results and I say, wait, can you explain this to me here? The patients that have such and such this and the symptoms, but it's not correlating with the results. And Sam being who Sam is, he gets right to it and say, okay, here's why. And so I've been doing that with him, using his lab for SIBO for a number of years.
Okay, that's great. And then so let's say you get some positive results. Let's say the SIBO breath test comes back positive for methane SIBO, and the stool test shows some overgrowth of certain bacteria or maybe candida and maybe some issues with a lack of digestive enzymes. Where do you start? Do you treat multiple things at the same time? Do you try to prioritize? What's your approach to treating gut issues?
Yeah, I focus. I try to stay really laser focused on what condition or symptom is disturbing the patient the most. because of course, when we are bloated, there could be an n number of possibilities and a million things that we can do to get to the bottom of it. And that alone can overwhelm anybody, can overwhelm me when I'm looking at a patient and go, there's so many steps for him to take. So the first thing that I do, and it's going to sound repetitious, but I meet the patient and I want to know, is this the right time for you? Are you ready to do this? Because here's what happens, right? As we know, and this is the psychologist hat that I'm wearing here right now, Ben. As we know, we can set up our patients for failure without knowing it. Of course, we don't mean that, right? We want to help the patient. But if we don't know what his lifestyle is like, if we don't know what his emotional life is like, the demands on him is like, and we say, okay, you have to do this, this, and this. And he's going to be looking at you because he respects you as a practitioner. After all, he came to see you. And he's going to say, yes, yes, yes. And he's going to go home and start pulling his head out, right? Literally putting not his hair, but his head out of his neck because there's so much going on. And so I want to make sure that I'm not overwhelming the patient. You know, I love that saying, you cannot feed a starving child a piece of steak, right? Because the child doesn't have the metabolism for it, she's been starving. So if a patient is that full of symptoms and that overwhelmed in life, I want to know what is it that I can do. So I'm going to ask him first. I said, okay, so here's the diagnosis. You have SIBO and it's curable, but it will require your attention. You require that you really spend time deciding what you're going to eat. We're going to give you protocols, taking your supplements, sweating a lot, exercising to get these toxins out of your body. Tell me about your lifestyle. Tell me about your lifestyle right now. If you could, is there something that you can do? And then I will list the things to them. And so they will look at me and say, well, I think so. I say, okay, let's make a list of the things that you can do. So
I don't have time for all that. I don't want to change my diet. Just give me something to take.
Exactly. And so I'll say to them, it won't work. It's only going to frustrate you. It won't work. And so I try, and then given the lifestyle, let's say somebody who's a single mom and working during the epidemic and trying to keep the kids at home, I cannot tell her to go exercise every day or to go to go into an infrared sauna, right, and have the luxury of sweating out some of the toxins. But I can say to her, okay, so given those things on the list that you can do, pick 3 that you can do right now. And of course, one of them has to be a set of supplements and herbs that I can help the patient with. So once we determine the lifestyle and the question of, is the patient ready to do this? Then I will present the patient with the plan. And the plan usually, if it's SIBO, will involve what I refer to as the John Hopkins protocol.
Okay.
It's the paper that came out about 7 years ago that revolutionized the field. And I know you're familiar with it.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, where it showed that rifaximin, neomycin, and flagyl together was very helpful. But a set of specific herbs that they studied called Fc-cyto, Dysbiosis, and Candibacter from Metagenics was actually equally effective.
Right.
And so I put them on that protocol to start with, 3 supplements in the morning, 2 of each, and then they make 6 pills and plus at lunch, at dinner time. And then I will look at other physiological needs of the patient, including hormonal therapy.
So let's drill down for a minute on your specific protocols for SIBO. So the patient, we've identified SIBO as their primary issue. So you're going to put them on some of these antimicrobial herbs. Are you going to put them on what type of diet? Are you going to put them on a low Fodmap diet?
Yeah, depending on again, the lifestyle of the patient, right? But let's say it's somebody who can follow the protocol. So a Fodmap diet is the first diet that I start with. And I let the patient, I give them the guidelines and I say, let's see which food in this list you can indeed consume that without having some of the bloating that you may have experienced in the past. I'll ask the patient if some of those foods have caused bloating. If financial means is not a problem, then I'll also do a food sensitivity, right? I really like Metagenics, Cyrex. Yeah, using the food sensitivity, the leaky gut sensitivity, because the worst thing for these patients is that we say to them, here's the Fodmap list of foods, only to later on find out that they have sensitivity to some of those foods. And so if they can do the test or afford the test, I'll do the test. In some situations they can't, then I do an elimination diet. I go through the list of them, of foods that they know they have experienced a relationship to bloating, cause and effect. And I will remove these foods from the Fodmap list.
Okay, so you'll combine low FODMAP and elimination diet to start with?
Yes. Again, because you want the patient, I want to empower the patient. Also, right?
So now the low FODMAP diet already eliminates a number of foods that people would typically take out, right? So it eliminates dairy and gluten and beans. What are some of the other foods you'll eliminate in the elimination aspect of the diet?
Well, I want to know if the patient, for instance, if the patient can tolerate oat, for example, right? I tell them oatmeal is a good source of complex carbohydrate.
Well, let's say they don't know.
Then I say to them, well, let's, before we start you on this diet here, why don't you eat this food for 3 to 5 days? And let's see how you feel once you, at the end of 3 days. I want to make sure that some of the foods that I'm going to give it to them, if they haven't done the sensitivity test, that they know whether or not it's one of those trigger foods for them. Right. Okay. And so I will involve them in their own elimination diet before I will give them the Fodmap if they don't have the food sensitivity test on board.
Right. Okay. What are some of the other common foods besides oats that you see are problematic?
Well, a lot of patients, believe it or not, even though they can have some fruit in the Fodmap, even some of the berries that we recommend, they have a hard time breaking down some of those fruits, including berries, for example, that I've seen. And so again, I tell them, what do you put in the berry? How do you eat the berry? Because sometimes they think it's the berry, only to find out that it's the coconut milk that they put in the berry. But it was not the coconut milk. It was the added things to the coconut milk. So that you can take this so far, so long down the road of trying to find out through elimination diet what the patient's actually sensitive to. We know it's not a food allergy because they would know. Okay. But food sensitivity is so hard to detect, as you know.
Right. And probably changes over time depending upon leaky gut and how often they're eating it and things like that.
It does. And that's why I also think that it's really great for patients to be able to design their own diet. It gives them power, right? I give them the Fodmap, for instance, the Fodmap guidelines. And within Fodmap, I want them to tell me which diet, number one, they can stick to and which diet they think it's going to work for them. So in that regard, I become a consultant to the patient who is receiving the information from her or his body, and I'm only consulting with him or her based on what they're saying. I think that empowering patients, especially with SIBO and bloating disorders, is essential for the success of the treatment.
Now, some of the other strategies that some of the doctors in the SIBO world employ include addressing potential motility issues, because we know that there's this potential autoimmune origin of SIBO where you have this damage to the migrating motor complex. So some practitioners will use either prescription or natural prokinetic agents. Do you ever use those?
Yes, yes. If the patient has an elimination problem, right? So if the patient has an elimination problem or it's irregular, then I've tried a couple of natural ones out there, but the one that I really like right now that is making a lot of that's bringing a lot of benefits to my patients is actually erythromycin, 50 milligrams. I found that it's
low dose erythromycin.
low dose, yeah, heavily formulated. And again, I feel that for most of my patients, they're really able to respond well to that, to the point where before I stop the erythromycin, usually I'll give them a break after 90 days, because that's how I treat SIBO for 90 days. And then I try to scale back. Then I may even do erythromycin every other day, including also the SIBO protocol, that so-called Hopkins protocol, the way I refer to it. If the patient is doing well after 90 days, I will not stop it. I will pulse it. So I would do 1 week on, 1 week off, just to see how the patient does, to kind of try to get to the big question of bacterial seeding. It seeds there, it stays there. And so instead of stopping altogether, I like kind of pulsing the medication. And another thing that I think is important with these patients is, even though they may test negative for candidiasis, I often assume that there's candidiasis in there. Even, as you know, it's one of the most difficult microorganisms to detect. So depending on the severity of the symptom, part of my protocol will include putting the patient on either a natural anti-candida protocol, using oregano oil, using really a blend that I love. It's called the gamma oil, which has, olive oil, has a lot of turmeric, it has garlic, it has, basil. It's like this incredible combination of herbs, really herbs that have been studied for many, many decades out there in integrative medicine. I like using that. When that doesn't work, then I will go to nystatin and start them on nystatin. Again, sometimes for 3 months, pending that the liver enzymes are good and everything points to that being a good thing for them. I'll start them on nystatin and then scale back and put them on the natural ones.
Now, would that be concurrent with the antimicrobial SIBO treatment, or before or after?
No, I usually do concurrently, right? I've spoken with a number of colleagues in the field, and people do it differently. Some people do it as part of the protocol. Some people do it after the protocol. I do it based on the symptoms of the patient. If the patient has symptoms that clearly indicates that is a candida element. It's a woman with a lot of discharge, the coating on their tongues, I can also look at any rashes that they have that can become really beefy red all of a sudden. There is the whole picture of candida that we can tell. Also, a lot of people who may have negative tests for methane, which gives the foul smelling, to our guests, even though they may have test negative for methane, there's a lot of odor to their elimination. I will think of candida and I'll say, let's try to see if we can mediate that with a little bit of an approach to candida.
Some practitioners do an organic acids test. They feel that that's a more accurate way to pick up candida overgrowth.
Yeah, the O-test, we use O-test a lot, especially because of the pandemic. But I use that when I'm not really clear that there's no signs, Ben, and I'm kind of like on the fence about it. The patient can afford it. It's an expensive test. Insurance doesn't cover. But sometimes I ask myself, will the O-test change my approach? If the answer is yes, then I will do the O-test. In most cases, it's no, it's not. The patient clearly has a symptom that maybe a lab will show, but maybe not. So let me try this kind of litmus test even for 30 days, and see how the patient respond. Thing that I also think it's missing in our field out there is trying to, once the patient starts feeling better, is really looking at the person's hormone metabolism and see how are their hormones working for them. Is it time for us to think about hormonal replacement therapy? Because sometimes fatigue and not being able to digest the food, a lot of the symptoms of SIBO, as we know, become enhanced or gets worse when our hormones metabolism, in addition to thyroid, of course, is not balanced.
How do you prefer to test for hormones?
Well, we blood test. It's our go-to approach. For women, if they're still menstruating, we try to do it between day 17 to 22 during the luteal phase. For men, we do it, whenever whenever he has the time to come in. But I think a blood test is the best way to go. Sometimes we'll also use the Dutch test to see if there's anything else going on with that. We may even do a urine test to test through urine as well. But I think, especially with COVID, there's so much going on in terms of really being able to get to a treatment that works for patients as soon as possible, that I think the blood test offers the best and quickest approach to assessing hormone metabolism.
I'd like to interrupt this fascinating discussion we're having for another few minutes to tell you about another really exciting product that has changed my life and the life of my family, especially as it pertains to getting good quality sleep. It's something called the Chili Pad, CHILIPAD. It can be found at the website chilisleep.com, which is CHILISLEEP.com. And so this product involves a water-cooled mattress pad that goes underneath your sheets and helps you maintain a constant temperature at night. If you've ever gotten woken up because the temperature has changed, typically gets warmer, this product will maintain your body at a very even temperature, and it tends to promote uninterrupted quality deep and REM sleep, which is super important for healing and for overall health. And if you go to chilisleep.com and you use the affiliate code Weitz20, that's my last name, WEITZ 20, you'll get 20% off a Chili Pad. So check it out, and let's get back to this discussion. One more question on SIBO. Does your approach differ if the patient has hydrogen versus methane versus hydrogen sulfide SIBO?
You know what? That's a question that I was asked about a week ago also by another.
Oh, really?
Caller. Yeah. And for me, it really doesn't, because I have found that in the years that I've been doing this, Ben, that most people will have a hybrid of those two gases together. One may be more dominant than the other. And I equate this to looking at people's hormone. A woman may be estrogen dominant versus not, but the approach to treating the hormone balance will change, but not drastically. We'll just have to pay attention to that other part. So when it comes to SIBO, because it is so difficult to pinpoint a precise diagnosis, I will focus on what the lab is saying, methane dominant, hydrogen dominant, but I will actually when I develop a treatment, I will treat both.
Okay. Since your background in psychology makes you, in many ways, a unique practitioner, if you determine that in a given patient with bloating and other gut symptoms that mental and emotional issues are playing a significant role, and this question is probably more for functional medicine practitioners, what sorts of tools or strategies, other than simply referring the patient to a counselor, can functional medicine practitioners do when they're treating a patient for gastrointestinal symptoms that have a significant mental or emotional component?
Excellent question. And I know how busy most of us are, especially with the pandemic. But the number one thing that I would suggest that we do is to listen, right? To listen to the patient, to listen to our own judgment that we may have. You know, we all have it. The question is how much? Is it a judgment? Is it a discernment? So I think listening to our patients, relating to the patient, taking a step back and say, how would my life be affected if I were that patient right now with SIBO, with not feeling good, having to take care of the kids, not feeling sexy, feeling that no matter what I do, I failed, right? Because a lot of patients come in with a multitude of steps they've taken before that either worked for a little bit and stopped or never worked. So the first thing that I check, and I do a self-assessment, is, can I leave my judgment out the door? And can I be here with this patient, no matter what he looks like, what she looks like, what my feelings might be, let me listen. So listening to the patient and putting yourself in their shoes, I think is the best step, the first step. Second step, in the very excellent question, Ben, is to say, what is the purpose of this condition right now in this person's life, right? Not to say that I believe that people can sit down and basically muscle themselves into a condition, right? All the time. That is possible. It's not common. What's common is that people come in with a condition that relates to a particular incident in their lives or a particular situation. And my job is try to connect the dots with them without empowering them, by not letting them for 1 second think that I'm implying that it's all in their heads. You know, it's not. Even when I don't know why and it doesn't meet my scientific evidence, I still want to let the patient know that I believe what she's saying or what he's saying. So the second step for me is to try to see what the connecting dots is. About 3 weeks ago, I had a female patient who came in very, very bloated, and she had been to some of LA's great doctors, some of whom are really good friends of mine and have actually become people that I look up to when I have questions. And she felt very deflated. She felt that nobody was listening. She felt that the main question that people were asking her is, are you pregnant? And the book talks about a case, use the book. It talks about a case like that. And it became very interesting quickly after that she's a single woman, her clock is ticking, and she's not pregnant. But the question is that I had to be very careful in navigating is, would she like to have a baby? And the answer was yes. And so there's this really discomfort in her psyche, this duality of her feeling really upset that people are assuming that she's pregnant. But actually, there's a part of her that goes, oh, this is what I would look like if I were pregnant. So we had to talk about that. We had to talk about this discord. She is feeling upset about it. There's a part of her that actually likes when she looks in the mirror and she sees her belly protruding out. So really helping her understand that those two things are not jiving in her psyche, that we need to go in and make peace with it. So that's one case. As we know, disease can have secondary gains. Now, so for her, the secondary gain was that she really wanted to get better, but she actually was dubious about the fact that, or was curious about the fact that she looked pregnant. Sometimes it's like the feeling. So what is the secondary gain? A guy who is not happy at home, who doesn't feel connected with his wife, has a protruding belly, is this an excuse for him not to be intimate? Is that another excuse? So let's talk about that. We talk about SIBO. We do everything in the protocol, but let's talk about what else is under the hood. This is if the patient wants to. So, or is ready to talk about that. So I think exploring who the patient is, connecting with the patient, asking questions, if bloating had a message for you, I ask them, if bloating, this is going to sound weird, I tell them, it's going to sound really weird, but if bloating had a message for you, what would that message be? And they kind of go, what? I said, sometimes disease can have a message for us. If bloating could whisper something to you about why it's there, what would it whisper? Right? So right. Really looking at those pieces, I think, I think it's important. And I understand that a lot of us don't have the time to do that. So there were times that I didn't have the time during the pandemic, the height of the epidemic in California, that I had to see people for shorter amount of time. But I would post those questions via email to them and say, okay, here are the questions. Here's what we found out. Here's your treatment. Here's the questions that I'd like for you to answer. And so I would post those questions. And so some people, the post question in writing was more comfortable than being asked in the session.
Right.
So
interesting.
Your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're an excellent writer. And one of the things that makes your book very readable is the stories that you weave in between, and really makes your book very human and not just like a medical textbook.
Yes, I thank you, Ben. I had to really think about how do I want to write. What do I do to write a book about a topic that is so uncomfortable? Who talks about poop? We have a culture where that is a taboo. We don't talk about it. When I ask my patients, so what's your poop? What does your poop look like? What is the texture? I have to make a joke before I will do that, because otherwise people feel a little embarrassed or a little funny. So I wanted.
Yeah, I noticed you put in the first chapter that research shows that humans fart 14 times a day.
They do. They do. They're not the silent killers that we hear on an airplane, or that when we sit next to somebody in an airplane, we want to dash out the door. It happens. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to make people with this condition understand that they're not alone, and understand that it's something that happens more often than they know, and that it's just a matter of, it exists in a spectrum, that people who are really, really bloated beyond explanation, that we haven't been able to move the dial. And those are people with severe gastrointestinal dysbiosis, SIBO, and the people who have bloating occasionally. They eat something, they don't feel good. They notice that, again, the jeans are not closing. But bloating is a condition that is an equal opportunity condition, right? It doesn't discriminate. Whatever your socioeconomic background is, your ethnic background, your age, bloating is there. I see kids who are bloated. I see elderly who are bloated. So the two spectrums of the population. And what I think the book brought, where the book was successful, is that it told people stories. And why do we go to the movies? We want to hear stories. Why do we read novels? We want to hear stories. Why we watch TV shows, especially during the pandemic? Why is Netflix now a multi-billion-dollar company? Because we want to hear stories that we can relate to. And that was my goal in the book. It was to create a sort of a manual where people could go through, basic to a lot of people who have already done this, but really important to people who have no idea where to start. So I wanted to offer them some of those guidelines, while also telling them, look, let me tell you some stories that you may relate to. And And I had some good laughs in doing it.
You know what? I just want to throw in one more question. I know we only have about 3 minutes left, but and it might not be enough time to answer this, but we didn't bring up probiotics, and I'm sure that's a question a lot of people would want to know. And some practitioners I've spoken to don't believe in using probiotics because if there's bacterial overgrowth, let's not throw more in. Some practitioners feel that probiotics are actually the first thing you should do, the primary intervention. Other practitioners do like to use certain probiotics along the way because as we're killing the bad bacteria, we want to replace them with the good bacteria. What's your feeling about the use of probiotics while treating patients for conditions like SIBO?
Yeah, all of the above. Very simple.
Spoken like a true politician.
Yeah, I know. Again, Ben, who is the patient, right? And what is the symptom? Where does the symptom fall with that spectrum? What I will usually do with probiotics, I'll get a history of whether or not probiotics have helped them. Most of the patients will have taken probiotics because their friends told them to, or another doctor told them to. So get a history. Has probiotic made it worse, made it better, or no difference? If certainly has made it worse, I'm not going to use it. If it has made it better, I will say, let's do this. Let's do 1 week, 2 weeks of the probiotics and 2 weeks without, and see where you stand, where your body stands. If it's neutral, then I will do the same thing. I will start 2 weeks on and then stop for 2 weeks and see what happens. I think where I've made mistakes before, and I think some of my colleagues out there can relate, is when we try to put everybody on the same protocol, like a pigeonhole. And the way I explain this when I speak is that, look, there's 8 billion of us on the planet, and there's 8 billion fingerprints. So we cannot be treated the same. We have to be treated as unique individuals, and that's what I try to do. So that's why I said all of the above, because it depends on who the patient is. And I think probiotic is one of the most important approaches that we can use in trying to optimize the microbiome.
That's great, Dr. De Mello. Thank you so much for joining us. How can listeners and viewers find out about getting your book and find out about seeing you or coming to your clinic or doing consults with you or your colleagues?
Oh, thank you. So the website is akashacenter.com, and it's AKASHA, akashacenter.com, and you're going to have a list of services and programs that we offer. The book is its own its own landing page. It's called bloatedbook.com. Just bloatedbook.com. And you can also go to Amazon. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble and Apple. On Amazon, you can just say Bloated by Dr. Edison De Mello, and it gives you an option of what kind of format you want, Kindle or paperback.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. De Mello.
Thank you for having me, Ben. I appreciate this hour with you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for making it all the way through this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star ratings and review. That way more people will be able to find this Rational Wellness Podcast when they're searching for health podcasts. And I wanted to let everybody know that I do now have a few openings for new nutritional consultations for patients at my Santa Monica Weitz Sports Chiropractic and Nutrition Clinic. So if you're interested, please call my office, 310-395-3111, and sign up for one of the few remaining slots for a comprehensive nutritional consultation with Dr. Ben Weitz. Thank you, and see you next week.